Nearly 3 years after Chicago Police Officer Aréanah Preston was shot outside her home, one of the 4 men charged in connection with her killing has admitted guilt. Joseph Brooks accepted a 55-year prison sentence. But that sentence did not close the case. 3 other defendants, Trevor Breland, Jaquan Buchanan, and Jalen Frazier, still face unresolved charges. And for Aréanah's mother, Dion Mhoun, one man going to prison does not balance what her family lost. Brooks may live long enough to count every year of his sentence. Aréanah never made it to the graduation ceremony, waiting for her 1 week after she died. The gown was ready. The degree had been earned. The future she had worked toward was within reach. Then, in the early hours of May 6, 2023, everything ended outside her home. What began that night as an alleged robbery spree would lead 4 young men into Aréanah's path. Security camera video would capture their movements. An alert from her Apple Watch would become part of the emergency response. One defendant would allegedly speak about details that had not been released to the public. And nearly 3 years later, only one of the 4 cases has reached a guilty plea. As we revisit this story with the new 2026 court developments, tell us where you are watching from, and whether you remember when Aréanah Preston's name first made headlines. Because before we examine what Joseph Brooks admitted in court, we need to understand the life that was taken, the future that was waiting, and why this case is far from over.
As a mother, a heartbroken mother, a mother that's full of anger, rage, questions why.
A heartbroken mother speaking outside of court today as 4 teens were charged in the murder of her daughter.
I felt sorry for them because nobody obviously didn't pour into them. Nobody told them that they were loved. Nobody told them that you can do anything, like I constantly preach to my daughters. Anytime you can shoot somebody and say, that was my work, what kind of human would say that about another human being?
Aréanah Michaela Preston was only 24 years old, but she had already built a life defined by ambition, discipline, and service. She was the daughter of Dion Mhoun and Alan Preston, the stepdaughter of Terrence Mhoun, and the older sister of Amaya and Amira Preston. Her family remembered her as determined, warm, and deeply focused on the goals she set for herself. Aréanah attended UIC College Prep before enrolling at Illinois State University, where she studied criminal justice and graduated in 2020. Her interest in law enforcement was not based only on wearing a uniform. She wanted to understand the relationship between police departments and communities that had often experienced discrimination and mistrust. In 2019, she joined a study abroad program in Germany and Poland that examined Holocaust sites and the role institutions could play when injustice went unchallenged. The experience strengthened her belief that police officers had a responsibility to protect vulnerable people. Aréanah said she wanted to be someone who would fight for justice. On November 16, 2020, she joined the Chicago Police Department. She served in the 5th District, known as the Calumet District, while continuing her education at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. She was completing a Master of Jurisprudence and was expected to graduate on May 13, 2023. Her family and colleagues also said she hoped to move into federal law enforcement and eventually join the FBI. While Aréanah was completing an overnight shift, another chain of events was already moving across Chicago's South Side. The events that would end with Aréanah Preston's death began hours before she arrived home. According to the prosecution's original presentation in court, Jaquan Buchanan's girlfriend said she needed money for a barbecue. Prosecutors alleged that Buchanan then joined Joseph Brooks, Trevor Breland, and Jalen Frazier, who was 16 years old at the time. 2 women traveled with them. The group entered a Dodge Avenger and moved through Chicago during the early hours of May 6, 2023. Prosecutors said the 4 young men were armed, dressed in dark clothing, and wearing face coverings. The 2 women remained inside the vehicle during at least some of the encounters that followed, while the 4 men allegedly approached people on the streets and near their homes. This distinction matters. The prosecution did not describe all 6 occupants as carrying out the same actions. The 4 defendants were accused of leaving the vehicle, confronting victims, and taking property at gunpoint. The 2 women were described as traveling with them, and later became important to the investigation because they could identify members of the group and explain parts of the night's movements. What allegedly began as an attempt to get money for a social gathering quickly became a series of armed robberies spread across several locations. The group did not encounter Aréanah first. Before the stolen Kia reached her neighborhood, other people had already been confronted, pushed to the ground, threatened with firearms, and robbed of phones, cards, clothing, and vehicle keys. Each stop carried the group farther into the night. Each alleged robbery created more evidence, more witnesses, and another chance for the violence to become worse. The first victim was encountered shortly after midnight. Aréanah would be approached only after several people had already been targeted. Shortly after midnight, prosecutors said the group encountered its first victim in the 900 block of East 46th Street. She was 33 years old. According to the prosecution, the four young men approached her and took several personal items, including a designer wristlet, a belt, credit cards, and her phone. The encounter established the pattern that would continue through the early morning. The group traveled together, selected people who appeared vulnerable, confronted them with firearms, and left with whatever could be taken quickly. Approximately 40 minutes later, the group reached the 4700 block of South Indiana Avenue. There, prosecutors alleged that the four defendants stole a red Kia Forte, while the two women remained inside the Dodge Avenger. The Kia immediately changed the direction of the night. The group now had a second vehicle, one that did not belong to anyone traveling with them and could be used to approach new victims without directly exposing the Dodge. At approximately 1:07 a.m., the men allegedly drove the stolen Kia to the 10,000 block of South Wallace Street. Two women were standing outside a residence. Prosecutors said at least 3 armed assailants approached them, forced them to the ground, and took a purse and a cell phone. By then, the alleged crimes had moved beyond the theft of unattended property. People were being confronted face to face, threatened with firearms, and physically overpowered. Still, the group continued. At approximately 1:30 a.m., 2 members of the group allegedly approached a man who was sitting inside a Tesla in the 9100 block of South Merrill Avenue. They took his phone and the key to his vehicle. In less than 2 hours, prosecutors said the group had moved through several areas, targeted multiple people, stolen personal property, taken one vehicle, and used that vehicle to reach additional victims. The method was becoming consistent. Arrive quickly, confront someone, take what was available, and leave before police could catch up. But the red Kia was no longer simply part of the evidence from an earlier theft. It had become the vehicle carrying the group toward the encounter that would transform an alleged robbery spree into a murder case. At approximately 1:42 a.m., the Kia entered Aréanah Preston's neighborhood just as she arrived home from work. At approximately 1:42 that morning, Aréanah Preston reached the place where she should have been safest. Her shift was over. She was back outside her home, still dressed in the Chicago police uniform she had worked hard to earn. After hours spent serving the city, she had made it to her own street. But prosecutors said the stolen red Kia was already nearby. Video evidence described in court showed the Kia passing Aréanah before circling the block. That movement mattered. The people inside had already traveled through several parts of Chicago, and prosecutors alleged that they had spent the early morning looking for people to rob. Now, after passing a uniformed police officer outside her home, the vehicle returned. The Kia stopped. 3 people got out and ran toward Aréanah. Prosecutors said their intention was to rob her. What followed happened quickly, leaving Aréanah with almost no time to understand how many people were approaching or how heavily they were armed. The court presentation described muzzle flashes coming from at least 2 firearms. Aréanah reacted. She drew her service weapon and fired back, attempting to defend herself against the people rushing toward her. She was trained, armed, and still in uniform, but she was facing several assailants at once. The gunfire struck her in the face and neck. Other reports stated that she was hit at least twice and grazed by another bullet. The officer who had spent her career responding when strangers were in danger was now the person fighting for her own life outside her front door. The attackers began to leave, but prosecutors said one of them turned back. Aréanah was already down when that person allegedly returned to where she had fallen and removed her service weapon. The group then fled in the stolen Kia, taking the gun with them. That detail would become central to the investigation. It was not only another piece of stolen property. It was a police-issued firearm taken from an officer moments after she had been shot. Aréanah remained outside her home. There was no evidence that she had known the people who approached her. Nothing in the public record suggests she had been followed because of a personal dispute or deliberately selected long before that moment. Prosecutors described it as an attempted robbery committed by a group that had already targeted several other people. But Aréanah was not an ordinary victim to the men who ran toward her. She was in uniform. They could see that she was a police officer. Still, according to the prosecution, they continued. Only days earlier, Aréanah had been preparing to complete another major step in her education. 1 week later, she was supposed to receive her Master of Jurisprudence from Loyola University Chicago School of Law. Instead, she was lying outside the home she had just reached after work. Across the city, electronic systems had begun registering pieces of the emergency. The shots had been detected. Soon, another alert would be sent from the device on Aréanah's wrist. But detection did not immediately bring help. At approximately 1:42 a.m., the gunfire outside Aréanah Preston's home was detected by Chicago's ShotSpotter system. The alert registered what had happened, but according to court reporting, officers were not immediately dispatched because the district was dealing with a backlog. That delay became one of the most troubling details surrounding the response. 20 minutes passed. At approximately 2:02 a.m., another alert was generated, this time from Aréanah's Apple Watch. The device sent an automatic crash or fall-related notification, creating a second signal that something was wrong. An officer responded and found Aréanah outside her home. She had suffered gunshot wounds to her face and neck and was in critical condition. Rather than wait for an ambulance, the responding officer placed her inside a police vehicle and rushed her to the University of Chicago Medical Center. Doctors could not save her. Aréanah was pronounced dead at the hospital. The timing remains difficult to ignore. A system detected the gunfire at about 1:42 a.m. A second alert came from the device on Aréanah's wrist roughly 20 minutes later. By the time an officer reached her, she had been lying outside her home after being shot and robbed of her service weapon. For her family, that sequence leaves an unavoidable question. When gunfire is detected but help does not arrive immediately, what happens during those lost minutes? While officers were still trying to reach Aréanah, prosecutors said the stolen Kia was already being abandoned and set on fire. By approximately 1:46 a.m., only minutes after Aréanah was attacked, the stolen red Kia had reached a vacant lot in the 7200 block of South Eberhart Avenue. Prosecutors said the vehicle was abandoned there. Then came the fire. Within minutes, the Chicago Fire Department received a report that the Kia was burning. According to the prosecution, lighter fluid had been used, suggesting an effort to destroy the vehicle and anything inside it that might connect the group to the robberies and Aréanah's death. The Kia had carried the alleged offenders from one crime scene to another. It could contain fingerprints, personal property, biological material, gunshot residue, or other evidence showing who had been inside it and where it had traveled. Setting it on fire may have damaged some of that evidence, but it did not erase the night. There was also another missing item investigators needed to find: Aréanah's service weapon. Prosecutors alleged that one assailant returned to where she had fallen and took the gun before the group fled. That weapon was now outside police control, creating both an evidentiary problem and a continuing public safety concern. Later, prosecutors said Jalen Frazier told his mother that the group had sold Aréanah's firearm. Public reporting has not confirmed that the weapon was ever recovered. That leaves one part of the case unresolved even now: where the gun went, who may have received it, and whether it passed through other hands after the killing. The Kia had been burned, but the group had not disappeared with it. The Dodge Avenger still existed. Stolen property remained traceable. Witnesses had seen parts of the night, and images had already captured movements that fire could not destroy. The fire damaged the stolen Kia, but other evidence from the robbery spree remained intact. Investigators first focused on the Dodge Avenger, belonging to Jaquan Buchanan's girlfriend. Unlike the Kia, the Dodge had not been destroyed, and prosecutors said it helped connect the people traveling together before and during the alleged crimes. When police searched the vehicle, they reportedly found credit cards belonging to the 33-year-old woman robbed shortly after midnight on East 46th Street. Those cards created a direct link between the Dodge and the first reported robbery of the night. The two women who had traveled with the four young men also became important witnesses. According to prosecutors, They identified several members of the group after reviewing camera images or photographic arrays. Their accounts gave investigators information about who had been inside the vehicles and which men had allegedly left the Dodge or Kia during the separate encounters. Camera recordings from different locations provided another layer of evidence. They reportedly showed the vehicles moving between areas where victims had been confronted. The images also helped establish the order of events, from the earlier robberies to the Kia entering Aréanah's neighborhood. Firearms evidence would later become equally important. Investigators recovered weapons and examined bullets and cartridge casings connected to the case. Nearly 3 years later, attorneys for 3 defendants would challenge whether experts should be allowed to tell jurors that particular ammunition components had been fired from specific guns. But one of the most damaging allegations did not come from a vehicle, a firearm, or a camera. It came from a conversation. Prosecutors said Jalen Frazier contacted a friend after Aréanah's death and asked whether the friend had seen the news. During that exchange, Frazier allegedly referred to the killing as the group's work. The friend then contacted police. According to the prosecution, detectives later listened while the friend spoke with Frazier on speakerphone. During that call, Frazier allegedly discussed information about the killing that had not yet been released publicly. That allegation remains unproven because Frazier's case is still pending. He is legally presumed innocent unless he pleads guilty or is convicted in court. Still, consider the evidence prosecutors said they had begun gathering. Stolen credit cards inside the Dodge, witness identifications, camera images connecting vehicles to different locations, firearm examinations, and an alleged conversation containing non-public details. Which would carry more weight for you as a juror, the physical evidence or the reported speakerphone conversation? Share your view in the comments. By May 7th, investigators were no longer simply retracing the route of the alleged robbery spree. They were watching specific people. By May 7th, investigators had moved from tracing vehicles and stolen property to locating the people prosecutors believed had taken part in the night's crimes. According to prosecutors, Jaquan Buchanan contacted a former girlfriend and asked if he could stay at her home because he needed somewhere to hide. Police were already monitoring his movements. When Buchanan and the woman entered an Uber, officers stopped the vehicle. Prosecutors said Buchanan was carrying a Glock 19. Investigators later connected that firearm to the shooting outside Aréanah Preston's home. He was also allegedly wearing a belt taken from the first robbery victim, the 33-year-old woman confronted shortly after midnight on East 46th Street. Those 2 items placed evidence from separate points in the night with the same defendant. Property from the opening robbery and a firearm prosecutors linked to the final attack. Buchanan was taken into custody. His arrest reportedly alerted Joseph Brooks and Trevor Breland, who were inside a residence on South Bishop Street. Police surrounded the property, and a prolonged SWAT standoff followed. For hours, officers waited outside while Brooks and Breland remained inside. Eventually, both men surrendered and were taken into custody without the confrontation ending in further violence. Jalen Frazier was also arrested. Prosecutors later alleged that Frazier made damaging statements to his mother. According to their account, he admitted that he had taken part in the robberies and had been present when Aréanah was killed. He also allegedly told her that the group had sold Aréanah's service weapon. That firearm has not been publicly confirmed as recovered. By the end of the arrests, all 4 young men accused in connection with the robbery spree and Aréanah's death were in custody. But custody was only the beginning of the legal process. An arrest is not a conviction, and at that stage none of the 4 had admitted guilt or been found guilty by a jury. Prosecutors still had to prove what each defendant had done, what evidence could be used against them, and how Illinois law applied to a group accused of acting together. The arrests came quickly. Resolving 4 separate murder prosecutions would take considerably longer.
Looking young lady, finna get her master's next week, and these young punks gonna shoot. We gotta do something about this shooting and killing.
My son, he said he's seen her quite a few times. He's like, oh, we got a police in the neighborhood. That's good to know. I was walking my dog and people, come and hug and crying. And it's just sad.
She was on the force for just 3 years. Loyola University says Preston was set to graduate this coming Saturday with a master's degree from the law school.
Put the guns down. Pick up a Bible.
73-year-old Southsider Lavinia Fields not holding back, saying violent crime involving juveniles must cease.
Y'all dying quick enough. Why would you bother such a beautiful young lady trying to get her master's? It's not worth it. Go back to school, get an education, do something besides this shooting and killing. It hurts. It bleeds my heart.
On May 10th, 2023, prosecutors formally charged Joseph Brooks, Trevor Breland, Jaquan Buchanan, and Jalen Frazier in connection with Aréanah Preston's death and the crimes that allegedly preceded it. All four faced first-degree murder and felony murder charges. They were also accused of offenses tied to the earlier events, including armed robbery, burglary, possession of a stolen vehicle, arson, and weapons violations. The exact charges differed by defendant. Buchanan faced an additional allegation involving possession of a machine gun or automatic weapon. Breland was also charged as a felon in possession of a firearm and with violating an order of protection. Frazier was only 16 years old when Aréanah was killed, but prosecutors charged him as an adult. At their initial court appearance, Judge David Kelly ordered all four defendants held without bail. After reviewing the prosecution's presentation, he described the evidence as substantial. Each defendant originally maintained a not guilty position. The state's case did not require prosecutors to prove that all four men personally fired the bullets that struck Aréanah. Their theory was that the defendants were acting together during an armed robbery and that Aréanah was killed during that alleged felony. Under that theory, a participant could face murder liability even if another person fired the fatal shot. But prosecutors would still have to prove the defendant's participation and legal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Being charged together did not guarantee that all four cases would end in the same way. Each defendant had separate attorneys, separate legal issues, and the right to challenge the evidence against him. For more than 2 years, the case moved through those evidentiary disputes rather than jury verdicts. By 2025, Joseph Brooks's defense team was challenging whether jurors should ever hear statements he had made after his arrest. His attorneys filed a motion asking the court to suppress those remarks. The defense argued that Brooks had invoked his right to remain silent during the initial questioning. Under the Constitution, once a suspect clearly ends an interrogation, officers must respect that decision. But approximately 17 hours later, detectives approached Brooks again. He was given another Miranda warning, informing him of his right to remain silent and his right to an attorney. According to the court record, Brooks then agreed to speak. Prosecutors described the statements he made during that later interview as incriminating. His attorneys argued that the second round of questioning should not have taken place, and that anything Brooks said afterward should be excluded from evidence. If the judge agreed, prosecutors would have been prevented from presenting those statements at trial. The court denied the motion. That ruling meant the prosecution could use Brooks's later interview if his case went before a jury, subject to the normal rules governing evidence and trial testimony. It would be misleading to claim that this decision forced Brooks to plead guilty. The public record does not establish why he eventually changed his position. But the ruling removed one possible defense victory and left the disputed statements available to prosecutors. Then, in January 2026, attention shifted to the youngest defendant and the firearm evidence prosecutors wanted future jurors to consider. By January 2026, the case had entered a new phase. On January 14th, Judge Adrian Davis considered where Jalen Frazier should remain while awaiting trial. Frazier had been 16 when Aréanah Preston was killed, but by then he was 19. The court allowed him to remain at the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center rather than be transferred to the Cook County Jail. The ruling did not reduce the seriousness of the charges against him. It concerned only where he would be held while the prosecution continued. At that point, the cases against Frazier, Trevor Breland, and Jaquan Buchanan were still unresolved, and no trial dates had been announced. The following day, the court addressed another issue that could directly affect what future jurors would hear. Attorneys for Breland, Buchanan, and Frazier challenged the prosecution's proposed firearm comparison testimony. Their lawyers argued that examining bullets and cartridge casings involves a degree of human judgment. They warned that jurors might hear an expert's conclusion and treat it as completely certain, even though the defense believed the process contained subjective elements. Judge Davis rejected the attempt to exclude the evidence. She ruled that the prosecution's firearm expert could testify, leaving the defense free to question the methods and conclusions during trial. The decision mattered because prosecutors intended to use bullets, cartridge casings, and recovered firearms to connect weapons to the attack outside Aréanah's home. If jurors accepted that testimony, it could strengthen the state's effort to place particular guns within the events of that morning. Taken together, the January rulings suggested that the remaining cases were moving closer to trial. But before any jury heard the evidence, one defendant chose a different path. On April 2, 2026, Joseph Brooks returned to court. This time, he did not maintain his innocence. Brooks, now 22 years old, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder before Judge Adrian Davis. The court sentenced him to 55 years in prison, and public reporting stated that he must serve the entire sentence. With that plea, Brooks became the first defendant to accept legal responsibility in a case that had remained unresolved for nearly 3 years. For Aréanah's family, however, the sentence did not restore what had been taken. Her mother, Dion Mhoun, was inside the courtroom. She faced Brooks. She faced his family. And she spoke about the damage left behind by a crime that ended her daughter's life at only 24 years old. Dion told them that Aréanah had been taken from her, that the safety of her home had been violated, and that the city had lost one of its officers. She also spoke about the kind of person her daughter had been, someone she believed would have willingly helped people in need without being attacked for what they wanted. Afterward, Dion challenged the language people often use when a long sentence is imposed. Some called it justice. She did not. Dion explained that she had never wanted to reach a point where her daughter's life was exchanged for another young person spending 55 years behind bars. Brooks would now lose decades of his freedom, but Aréanah's family would still wake each day without her. There was no sentence that could return the week Aréanah was supposed to have. On May 13, 2023, she should have been wearing the graduation clothes prepared for her Loyola University Chicago ceremony. She had completed the work for her Master of Jurisprudence, while serving full-time as a Chicago police officer. Her plans reportedly extended beyond patrol work. She hoped to enter federal law enforcement and pursue a career with the FBI. Instead, Dion was left walking into her daughter's bedroom and seeing the gown and dress Aréanah had expected to wear. Those clothes had once represented another achievement. After May 6th, they became reminders of a ceremony Aréanah never reached. That was the reality standing beside the 55-year sentence. The court could decide how long Brooks would remain in prison, but it could not restore Aréanah's graduation, her career plans, the years her sisters expected to have with her, or the future her mother had watched her build. Brooks's plea answered one legal question. He was no longer contesting his guilt in Aréanah's murder. But it did not answer every question surrounding the attack. It did not reveal the final outcome of the cases against the other defendants. And it did not bring the wider prosecution to an end. Joseph Brooks was the first of the 4 to resolve his murder case. He was not the last person still before the court. 3 names remained on the docket.
People describe it as justice. It's no justice for me. I never wanted to sit in a place where I want to trade my daughter's life for a young man to sit in jail for 55 years. It was chilling. But I was glad that I got the opportunity to face him, face his family, and to tell them how I really felt, how they stole my child from me, how they just took so much of me that day for their own greed. I spoke of Aréanah, how she would have gave them whatever they needed. That just was the type of person she was. It is just such a horrific feeling to walk in her room and see that gown and that dress that she anticipated wearing. That's hard for me. The one thing, if I do anything, is give another mother that's going through this a little hope to just keep on going for your baby.
In her daughter's name, Dion Mhoun has created the Peace for Preston Foundation with a mission to help empower Chicago's youth to make good decisions in life. Cases against 3 other defendants are still pending.
Joseph Brooks's guilty plea resolved his case. It did not resolve the entire prosecution. In the latest verified reports, the cases against Trevor Breland, Jaquan Buchanan, and Jalen Frazier remained pending. All 3 continued to face serious charges connected to the alleged robbery spree and Aréanah Preston's killing. but none should be described as convicted unless a court later reaches that result. The prosecution still alleges that the men acted together during the attempted robbery that ended with Aréanah's death. The firearm comparison evidence challenged by their attorneys also remains available for future proceedings after Judge Adrian Davis allowed the state's expert to testify. But Brooks's decision to plead guilty does not automatically establish the guilt of any co-defendant. There are important differences between an allegation that remains before the court, a conviction reached after a trial, and a guilty plea entered by a defendant. Brooks chose the third path. The other three cases must still be resolved according to the evidence presented against each man. That means the legal story is not over. Aréanah's family continues to live with the consequences while waiting to see whether the remaining prosecutions will end in pleas, trials, acquittals, or convictions. Outside the courtroom, they have worked to ensure that Aréanah is remembered for the life she built. Her mother accepted her Master of Jurisprudence posthumously at Loyola University, Chicago. Her sister Amaya later carried Aréanah's photograph across the stage during her own graduation. A section of South Blackstone Avenue was designated Honorary Officer Aréanah M. Preston Way, and her name remains among Chicago's fallen officers. Her family also established the Peace for Preston Foundation. In 2025, the foundation endowed a $100,000 memorial scholarship at Loyola School of Law. So, does one 55-year sentence represent justice when 3 prosecutions remain unresolved? Share your answer in the comments. Subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories, and share this video so Aréanah Preston is remembered not only for how her life ended, but for the future she had already begun creating.